Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm really excited in this episode, not least of which because my guest is a mad keen cricket fan, which isn't something that happens often to Australians, that they get to have international conversations about cricket. Not that we will occupy our time with that, but we've already had that chat. And, Sam Thevanayagam has written a book called The First 10 Runs, which is life lessons from cricket. You can take lessons from sport about leadership, about stewardship, about success, and apply them to any theatre. And so, I was fascinated looking at something that I loved, the game of cricket, as a source of life lessons taught to him by his father, and from watching the greats and from playing the game. And for those of you that understand cricket, sitting in the slips trying to take the catch off a fast ball, watch the bowler's arm so you can follow it onto the bat and into your hands, and learn to read the googly and all these sorts of things. This means nothing to our guests that don't understand the game of cricket. For those that do, it'll mean everything. And find your equivalent in sport. But I'm looking forward to the conversation because of the scope and breadth of what Sam has achieved and what he does and what he thinks about. We live in a world of tips and tricks and hacks today. Everyone wants fast. Everyone wants kind of quick, and sometimes people want shallow. And, we have social, political, economic upheaval around the world, technological upheaval. And so the purpose of this show is just to share real wisdom, to get below the surface and find the meaningful conversations. And Sam came to the US from Sri Lanka and has established himself in the defence manufacturing industry, and particularly in the field of discontinued parts supply to keep, defence equipment available and able to continue to serve the purpose, that it serves. And defence is one of those interesting industries. It is also one of the mechanisms that allows us to have peace and enjoy freedoms. And so, Sam, you have so many things that I could talk about. On the you're serving on the board of directors of the National Defence Industrial Association. You have a whole bunch of certifications that I won't work through, but really you've brought these cutting edge solutions to manufacturing, particularly, I guess, what we would have called in the automotive industry aftermarket manufacturing and redundant part manufacturing. More particularly, you are you're a faith-driven leader, and everyone will have their own view on their belief systems and things like that, but you really have managed to mix a principled set of beliefs into leadership of very, very successful businesses in the defence industry, which is a tough market. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Sam, thank you for giving us this time. I know you're busy. I really appreciate it. Welcome to the Wisdom of.
Thank you for having me, Simon, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you very, very much. Let's kind of go to what sometimes might be the elephant in the room for people, right? Which is this idea of building a remarkable career and company, which is always based on quality of leadership, right? The strength of a company is always based on the quality of leadership, but building it from a specific place of belief system. And people will have their own different belief systems, but I think in a world today where business should be a powerful force for good on the planet, if you stand for if you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing, is the saying, right? And so how have you navigated the commercial world, right, which is often it's just about the financials, it's just about the money, it's just about efficiency and effectiveness, and this deep desire you have to also lead from a strong position of principles and beliefs. Has it been a challenge, or has it actually not been difficult at all for you?
It has not been difficult for me, Simon. But by the way, that's a great question. And so if you think about it, right, a lot of people are building companies through people, right? I have flipped that on its head. I'm actually building people by running successful companies, right? And if
Interesting.
you really think about it, every one of us was created by God with a purpose and potential. So that is really God's responsibility. My responsibility is to create an environment for others to achieve their God-given potential. That is my purpose for being, right? So that I can create an environment. You think about a goldfish, right? It needs water to swim in, right? It's elegant when it's in water, but you take the fish out of water, it loses its purpose and for potential, right? So a big responsibility, I feel, is to create that environment. And so specifically, even though I was in the automotive aftermarket, learned a lot about how to do business in that, I've been able to take that into the Department of Defense, which is extremely OEM centric,
Mm,
right? I've been able to teach a lot of the logisticians and the supply people in the Department of Defense that there is another way to do business, that you don't have to be at the altars of the OEM in order to get your work done, right? That there are other ways, if you think about it, God is the greatest creator. He has provided our ability to create. And so when we are part of that creation process, when we are part of that innovation process, that's the ability that he has already given us. And so I know, Simon, that you are into models. I actually created a model or a roadmap, right, that I was able to supply. I was actually able to use that to articulate to the Department of Defense exactly how I was going to solve their obsolescence issue.
mm, mm,
And like we talked a little bit about before we got on the show, that particular model or that particular roadmap has enabled us to make millions of dollars worth of revenue because I was able to show them how to get from a place of constraint, how to get from a place of lack to a place of being able to have the product that they need, and more importantly, that the ships are flying, the submarines are doing what they're supposed to do. So they are back in purpose because of the work that we do.
yeah, it's interesting. I am a models-based thinker, and indeed, our work is about helping companies explain complexity through the simplicity of visual models. And there's a world of difference between telling somebody something and showing it to them. And when people can see a pathway or they can see a structure or a framework, as you say, millions of dollars worth of revenue can hang off the back of that. The same is true, of course, when you're leading people in an organization. You can tell them what is going to happen or what you need to do. It's a lot of difference when you show them what's going to happen or what you need to do. And if we take modeling to its natural extension, the most powerful way you show people is to actually model the behavior, be the
Absolutely.
person that models it. And it's interesting what you said about your mission really is to develop people through business rather than grow business through people. That's such a distinction because I have a personal belief that business is one of the most powerful forces for good on the planet. And if that is true, then it really should be in service of people. The customer, the people that work there, the suppliers that serve it, etc., the community that lives around it. But we do end up with a flip sometimes where everyone ends up in service of the business or in service of commerce, maybe, if we put it that way. So it's a really interesting sort of twist, and I think a powerful one, actually. And so the people in your organization must feel that on a daily basis. That I know you have a lot of young people working in the business. You made a comment earlier when we were talking about you want to make manufacture. I come from a manufacturing background as well. You want to make manufacturing sexy again. I've never heard anybody say that, but I get it as soon as you say it. So because it isn't attracting young people. So, but you have,
Yep.
a lot of young people. They must feel that commitment you have to growing people what through the business. So, what is the impact of that on a company when the workforce really actually get that sense that this is what's happening? What
Right.
sort of impact do you see in your business because of that?
So Simon, I am at high schools, and trade schools. I have glasses on, the Tom Cruise Top Gun glasses on, because we actually remanufacture the F-18 launchers in our organization. So I wear these Top Gun glasses on as a way to be able to hook these young people, to make them understand that manufacturing can be a very good way for them to be able to build a life, to build themselves, and to be part of the American dream, right? So it's
Mm.
my way of doing that, and I'm constantly speaking at high schools. I'm constantly having people come in and do internships, because we want to provide line of sight for our young people, both from the trade standpoint, and even a lot of our engineers that work on all 5 domains: air, land, sea, undersea, space. We are making sure that we have a lot of young people who are learning and growing, because we also live in the age that a lot of people are retiring, right? So
Mm.
there's a loss in the workplace, and so leaders also work in the right place, right? And so I am purposeful. I'm very mindful, and I have a lot of intention about the work that I do. A lot of CEOs spend a lot of time. They're intentional about serving their customers, but they're not as intentional about taking care of their people. And so I am building a very sticky culture. You think about a sticky bun, right? You
Mm.
know, it holds on. It attaches to you, and that's the culture that I'm building. And I'm doing it through 4 things, right? An education. So we are very strong about workforce development, a place to live. We help people, buy their first home, through healthcare, and also, by providing them work. I mean, so this is transformational, right? And
Mm.
so people feel it, they understand it, they recognize. I was just looking at my numbers for tomorrow. My turnover is less than 2%. Doesn't mean that we lose some people, right? And usually when I lose somebody, it's because they're going to a larger company, because they're
Yeah.
going to a bigger company. That's a scratch I can't itch yet, because my size is my size, right?
Yes.
But on the other hand, my responsibility is for when they are working for me, right? And so, I am very focused on it. I'm very intentional about it. This whole day, this whole morning, I spent training about 35 people on procurement. That's not an area that most people even train on.
Yeah.
They talk about supply chain, but we spent a lot of time just specifically talking about procurement, how to treat your suppliers, how to not go after everything, but to make sure there's enough profit there so that we are creating a win-win relationship and that kind of stuff. So I am, my mother was a teacher. I'm passionate about teaching. And if you think about Jesus, right, and you talked about models, Jesus taught in models,
Mm.
right? So he used parables as a way to be able to think about those things that were unfamiliar,
Mm.
right? And so that's where models help. That's where parables help. It enables you to be able to teach a more complex fundamental, because you're breaking it down for people to understand. Whether if it was the good shepherd or the prodigal son, right? These are stories, these are models that people can grasp. And then by grasping that, they can really understand the more eternal perspective, which is the kingdom of God.
Yeah. If you give people, if you plant something complex that you want to share with people inside that with which they're already familiar, if you enter the conversation they're already having and then extend it, you always get much further than you do if you try and just drop a large conversation over the top of them. And, I love those 4 things that you're trying to, and I love the concept of a sticky culture. A 2% turnover rate in culture is ridiculously small. And you haven't scratched that itch, you said, but maybe the job is not to scratch that itch. Maybe a part of your job is you're sending people out to be leaders in other companies,
Exactly.
carrying the ripple effect, right, and hitting other
Yep.
shores. But I love those 4 things. So, education for personal development, housing, so they have a roof over their head, healthcare, so that they feel secure if things don't go to plan in terms of their health. And then the 4th one was, of course, employment, which is the
Yep.
ability to support
Absolutely.
themselves. These are primary human needs
Yep.
And you're being intentional about that. And yeah, I think there's a lesson in that for anyone that leads a company, that if the primary needs aren't being taken care of, it's hard to muster um, people's commitment to the vision and the mission and the values of the company. And here's what we're going to do when they're struggling with the primary needs,
Yep. So
whilst in your employment. It's a fundamental challenge. Your mother said, to whom much is given, much is also expected. So it's this.
yep,
There is a leadership responsibility, right?
absolutely.
If you have the privilege of running a company, while we're talking about young people and you visiting schools, we live in a world of urgency and immediacy, and everybody wants everything now. Everybody wants their career to hit full speed the day they start working. People want to be able to buy into the dream home rather than buy the first one, then the second one, and the third one, et cetera, et cetera. But in your book, you talk about the first 10 runs. And I think, you have 4 kind of lessons from cricket, but the first 10 runs is an interesting lesson because it's counterintuitive to the world today of get everything fast. And I'd love you to talk through the lessons out of the lesson out of the first 10 runs, because I think a bit of patience and pause in today's world would be healthy for people to think about. You might
Yep.
have to explain why the first 10 runs even matters in cricket for the non-cricket fans.
Yep. So the whole title is the first 10 runs in singles.
Yes.
Right. And so what my father was telling me was that when you get in there, start small. Right. And so for those people who are in North America and may not understand cricket, we're talking about getting on base. Right. We're talking about blocking and tackling in football, getting the fundamentals right and getting used to the light, the speed, the pace, right, the rhythm of the game, right? It's very important for us to capture that first before we go after the long ball, if you will, right? And so that's what the first 10 runs in singles teaches us. And even if you think about what I do for industry, right, we are in a high mix, low volume industry. Right, high mix, low volume, because of obsolescence, I'm making 5 of something, 8 of something, 10 of something, and that really fits into this model of the first 10 runs in singles. Right, we're not going after the big thing. So I tell people, I have a big vision, but I play small ball. Right, I have to play small ball and I have to play it really well in order for me to be successful. So whether it is in my book, I talk about hitting off the front foot, right? You can't just stand like in golf and swing. So in cricket or in baseball, you are actually leaning into it. It's a very intentional stroke. And that's exactly what initiative is, right? Whether it's initiating a conversation with a customer, it's an initiating a conversation with either a mentor or an employer. And the same thing is true when you're hitting off the back foot. So unlike in baseball, where your stance doesn't go back, in cricket, we have the ability to go back. And why is that important? Sometimes you don't have to do it. You don't have to do something right away. You can really allow for things to develop before you figure out what it is that you're going to do, right? So not everything, while the front foot is important, right? Wisdom says when you use the front foot versus how you use the back foot, right? Allow things to develop, allow things to take time. Don't be the first one out there, right? Make sure that you're getting a feel for what it is that you're doing before you commit. That's the patience part of it. The other one is the understanding of a googly, right, or a curveball, right? A googly is ball like a leg break that turns like an off break. And the thing that I talk about is you don't learn to play the googly out of your mother's womb. Even really good batsmen continue to struggle with reading the googly, right? And so it's something that you learn through failure, right? So failure is not a bad thing if you can learn from it.
Yes.
Right. And so especially with a lot of young people, and if you look at the cricket playing audience, there's 2 billion people out there that love the game of cricket. And it was very important for me to teach young people, especially from Southeast Asia, especially the fact that they're going to different countries in order to be able to make a living, right? It's very difficult for them to have these types of lessons as a way for them to be able to navigate maybe the new culture that they're in. And so it was important for me to write it from that standpoint of really making it empowering for young people to be able to learn and to grow from it.
You talk about uh, growing people through business, which really puts a different agenda on your own strategic planning and business intention, right? Because this business has a much greater meaning than profitability and wealth creation. And so if you don't grow it, if it's not successful, you're not able to grow the people, but you do have a young workforce. And a lot has been written about the younger generations these days, but they are the leaders of the future. And a key part of what you do is seeing greater potential in the individuals than they perhaps see in themselves at that stage of life. How do you, so you are a leader in your company, then you have other leaders underneath you. There's this conscious, intentional desire to build a sticky culture. You've got practical things in place to do that. But how do you pass down that focus on seeing the potential in people that they don't see in themselves, and not just with you, but through the leaders in your company, so that, people don't have to just meet you to experience that? It is the DNA of the company. What sort of things do you do with your leaders so that they're actually seeing potential in younger people that the young people don't even see themselves yet?
And what I can tell you, Simon, is I have really surrounded myself with like-minded people, right? What the most beautiful thing about my organization is that the leaders around me have caught my vision, right? And they're doing not exactly, but even more than what I started to do. So they've learned about creating pathways and pipelines, right? What is amazing to me is not only what I have created, but now what I'm seeing the other leaders starting to create. So they are giving people time and space. Yes. In order to be able to grow, in order to develop. One of the things growing up in Sri Lanka, Simon, is I grew up in a Christian home where my parents, they really practiced unconditional love. My father was an army officer. My mother was a teacher. So service was very important. But to their children, they showed us unconditional love. They didn't love us based on performance. They loved us because of who we were or who we were, right? And so I have taken that same stance with our people. Right, we even though we are a sticky culture and we have some very stringent rules, we start work at 7:30, and this is when we finish. Sometimes people are late. Sometimes people are tardy. We don't change the standard, but we provide opportunities for them to be able to grow into those roles, right? And so sometimes we have to apply grace so that people are able to learn and become part of something, because some of our young people, they don't have a lot of structure, right? And so I even write in my book about submission, right? Not a very good word, right? When we talk about leadership, when you are submissive, right, to structure, in order to be a good disciple, in order to be a good follower, you have to submit. So I talk about the umpire. Or you talk about a referee, right? So the umpire is right? The umpire is controlling the game. There is no point in arguing with the umpire. A no ball is a no ball. A catch is a catch, right? And if you think about taking guard in cricket, right, which doesn't happen in any other sport, you are actually working on lining up with the wicket, right? You don't expect the wicket to change. The wicket is a constant. Yeah. Right? What you are doing is submitting yourself to being able to line up correctly, right? So alignment is important. So these are some of the concepts that I've taught my leaders. And Simon, what makes me really thrilled is I have also made sure that the leaders that have come after me are following in my footsteps. They recognize and understand the culture. They recognize and understand the rules of the game. They understand the rules of engagement and are very careful to being able to make sure that that environment is correct. It's like chicken curry is one of my favorite foods, right? In order to make sure that the chicken curry tastes good, you got to make sure that you have the right ingredients in the right amount and in the right time in the cooking process, right? So just because you have the ingredients right, if you don't administer it correctly or not in the right time, it could actually change how that curry is going to taste, right? So all of those things are important. So this is not a haphazard way of doing business. You talk about models. There is a model, there is a recipe, there are parts to this recipe,
Yeah.
there are ingredients to it, and we got to apply it correctly in order to be able to make sure that the chicken tastes good.
Well, you use some interesting words right at the start of that discussion around allowing people the space and time. And we don't do that much these days. It's such a frenetic pace. But if you don't allow your leaders the space and time to become the leaders you need them to be, they just don't become the leaders you need them to be. They do what they can. They do what they can get away with if they don't have the space and time to become the leaders you need them to be. They will compromise what they turn into, and if they're not afforded the space and time. And that's kind of counterintuitive. I mean, defense and aerospace are complex industries, with potentially from an outside view, high risk, certainly big dollar. And, there is sometimes in manufacturing, and we both have experience in manufacturing, there's a potential for people to have this. We've just got to keep pushing hard. You've got to, and let's get this thing out there. It's the first 10 runs in singles, you can hit 4s and 6s for the non-cricket people, and young kids playing cricket want to go and hit the big runs, the 4s and the 6s, but be patient and allow the space and time. And it is an old piece of wisdom. Pause is a weapon. The ability just to pause for a half a second before you say something or you do something is a weapon. And we're losing that in society. Let's talk about the actual business for a moment. And then I'd like to circle into stewardship and entrepreneurship, which I know is something you're very interested in. I've been talking about stewardship for a long time, but let's just talk about the defense industry for a little bit and complex manufacturing. You're in the diminishing manufacturing parts, where things are becoming unavailable, but people still need to keep that equipment running. That by itself has complexity. You're having to retro or reverse engineer. There's a lot of complexities in that, and your clients are all mission critical. What have you, and Parts Life was a turnaround story for you, as was Deval, right? So when you bought it, it wasn't performing like it is now. And then I think Deval came out of bankruptcy, and you've turned that around.
Yeah.
So you're in an intense commercial environment. Clients get mission critical products from you. They have complex purchasing systems. They have very, mil specs. They have very high levels of requirement of suppliers. What are some of your lessons you would share with people from your ability to have turned these around and created great companies in which people can grow and prosper? What are some of the commercial lessons that you could share with people about how you pulled all this together? Because it's not, you're not. This is not a simple thing that you do. It's a complex business.
What I can tell you, Simon, is entrepreneurship was not something that didn't start when I was 18 or 22 years old. Even though I had a very entrepreneurial spirit, I worked for a lot of companies, right? And I worked for a large company that taught me how to scale and, taught me how to create an organizational structure, talked to me about, quality principles, leadership principles, the scientific methodology of root cause analysis, failure modes, effects analysis. So one thing that I would say to you, Simon, is, again, that's the first 10 runs in singles.
Yes.
normally I'm a person that is extremely impatient, right? But
Yeah.
I had to work for somebody else and I had to learn on somebody else's dime all of these methodologies, all of these concepts long before I started Parts Life. When I started it, I bootstrapped it, and then so I knew how to scale. Right, because I had worked in a large organization, I understood scale. I understood that constraints will start to move as I
Mm.
scale, right? And so I have had to go back and constantly look at the organization, understand the size that it was, and say, this is what it needs right now, or this is where I'm going to need this, right? So thank God, you talk about wisdom. The Bible says in James 1:5, if any one of us lacks wisdom, it's for us to ask. And so I'm constantly praying for wisdom, and God has given me wisdom to be able to actually take an organization and bootstrap it to grow it. And then I bought a company out of bankruptcy in 2017 and put in all of the ingredients that it was missing as a way to be able to take that to the next level. So that company, Deval, has a huge footprint on the F-35 program today because of the work that I was able to do in redeeming it, and not only redeeming it with cash, because there are problems that money can solve, right? But
Yeah.
there are other ingredients that it takes more than money, right? And so not only did I write a check in order to be able to get it out of bankruptcy and redeem it, but then I had all of the other ingredients in who I was. God had actually prepared me to be able to put all of those blocks in place as a way to turn the company around, where we are a formidable supplier on the F-35 program. I'm sure the Aussies are probably using some of our support equipment as well that is made by DeVal, both on an aircraft carrier and also on runways on the F-35.
Mm. And you rattled off a bunch of things that were lessons you learned in your career before Parts Life. And once again, it brings us back to this whole idea of patience and pause. There were principles of scale and large companies and manufacturing, things like the quality assurance programs, the out of the mill specs, the quality standards that emerged, the ISO 9000 series, Six Sigma, as you say, root cause analysis, and theory of constraints. I suspect you're probably a Eli
Yeah,
Goldrat fan as well. Um, these were all things that are actually not sexy, but super powerful, and they're deep and complex, and it takes time to learn them, right? And so
yeah.
you couldn't possibly build the company you have if you don't have those skills.
Yeah, not only knowing those skills, but knowing when to apply them, right? So if you take Six Sigma principles, right, in
Yes.
order to create a Six Sigma data set, you need thousands of parts, hundreds of parts. Many times we are making 5 parts, right?
Yes,
So
right.
I am more into the theory of constraints and the goal. And actually, Eli Goldratt's daughter wrote a book called Rules of Flow, right? Which is how do you kit something, together in order to be able to create value. So these are all principles that are out there. One would argue, right? These are all, it's like a mechanic who has a whole set of tools in their tool set, right? But you have to apply it correctly. And that's where wisdom comes in. And because I had worked for somebody else, because I had actually made a lot of mistakes on somebody else's dime, don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't make mistakes today, but the mistakes that I make today are not as big because I learned to make a lot of those mistakes in my career, and I've been able to actually learn from them.
Yeah. And, a mistake is just another data point.
Yep,
That really, when you take the emotion out of it, it's another
yep,
data point. A,
yep,
a mistake is a mistake uh, that we feel emotionally. But if you take the emotion out, it gives you data that
yep.
allows you to, minimize the repeatability of the error.
Right. And I would call, so we talk about failing fast, right? So when I teach entrepreneurship, I talk about failing fast. So it's okay to fail, but it's important to fail fast because then you're going to learn quickly. That's number one. Number two, growing up in Sri Lanka, I work with natural rubber some. And one of the reasons why natural rubber makes a good seal surface, makes a good sealing material is because of its ability to bounce back, right? And so in the scientific term for it is called rebound resilience. The colloquial term for it is short-term memory, right?
Mm,
Rubber has short-term memory, and that's how we need to be when embracing failure, right? We need to be able to have that spring-like behavior where we're ready to bounce back so that our learning is quick. We're able to come right back and be able to take, it's like fielding in the slips.
yeah.
I think I write about that in my book. In my first match, I dropped a lot of catches, and my father said to me, "Stop watching the bat and watch the bowler's arm, and you'll start to take more catches," which is exactly what I did. So I went from failure to success in one or two games because I started to follow my father's advice.
Yeah. And for the people that are not familiar with cricket, fielding in the slips has you very close to the batsman, and the ball's coming off the bat at sometimes well over 100 kilometers an hour, and you're
And you're
expected
catching with your bare hands.
bare hands, right? And no mouth guards, no face guards, or anything
Yep.
like that. So you're either going to get hit or catch it or miss it. So
Yep.
it's fraught with danger and risk, and yet a great slips fieldsman catches more than they drop,
Yep.
because they've learnt the science of it. And
Yep.
I do fear in today's business world we've lost some of the sense of the science of business success, particularly in the entrepreneurial world. And in the startup world, there's a lot of enthusiasm around almost like diving and being bold and everything else. But the science is where the magic often is, actually. So
Absolutely.
you and I share a common, more than an interest, but a common fascination with this idea of stewardship and what does that actually mean. And it can be hard sometimes for businesses to figure out how to blend stewardship and entrepreneurship, or stewardship and business. I'd love to explore your definition or view on stewardship, and how you blend that with entrepreneurship and business success, because sometimes people see stewardship and entrepreneurship as separate, and I think they both coexist, to be honest. So what does stewardship mean to you?
Yeah, so Simon, I have a coin here. I have a challenge coin here. And
Mm-hmm.
as about 8 years ago, when I started to speak, nationally and internationally, God gave me this idea of creating a coin that says entrepreneurship on one side and stewardship on the other. Entrepreneurship, I'm using a sailboat, and stewardship, I'm using like I'm planting something that's
Yes.
about to grow, right? And the truth of the matter is, in my opinion, and my humble opinion, these two things are very connected, right? So let me give you a quick example of how we use a stewardship example in my business, right? So for instance, we do a lot of subtractive manufacturing, meaning we're actually machining a part and we are taking material out when we machine. We make sure that the aluminum scrap is actually put together, and at the end of the month, or when there is enough of a quantity, we actually sell it. And rather than put the money back in the business, I have actually created a benevolent fund that actually funds the needs of people when they need it, right? So it's like an emergency fund. When somebody needs it, their car broke down, they had to, fly somewhere because
Right.
of a death in the family, right? That is already funding that need, and I'm not responsible for that. The immediate supervisor knows exactly how to dispense the money. So it's a very empowering opportunity as well in order to be able to do this. And so isn't that a great way isn't that a great understanding of stewardship, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's interesting. Recently, I was listening to somebody that said, when Jesus fed the 5,000, after he finished feeding them, he made sure that the leftovers were picked up.
Yes.
Right. And so nothing in a stewardship environment, nothing goes to waste. Right.
Yeah.
You're constantly recognizing that really we are a steward. Right. And even my own business, right, in some ways, I'm the chief steward. Even though my wife and I own 100% of the organization, really, we are more stewards of what God has given us as a way to be able to steward for his purposes rather than for our own. Right.
Yes.
And so it's a good way to think about your time, your treasure, your talent, and even your touch.
Yes.
Right. Sometimes all people need is an opportunity to spend some time with you,
Yes.
right? Or your ability, just to be able to touch somebody. So when you talk about servant leadership, you're washing somebody's feet, you just took the time out to be able to touch them in a way that can have really awesome consequences for their lives. And this way, it's a good one.
I'm familiar with time, talent, and treasure, and the concept of stewardship, that you take the gifts. We've all been given this gift of life, and you take this gift and return it at the end with increase, so nothing goes to waste. And so the idea of, don't waste any of the time that's been given to you, don't waste the talents you've been given, don't waste the treasure that you've been afforded the opportunity to accrue. Touch is new to me. I like that. Don't waste your opportunity to just be the person somebody else needed to have around them in a moment. And what a wonderful thing for your company to have a fund provided for by what is in reality a manufacturing waste. So the waste has turned into this deep sense of support that your employees must have, that if the unexpected happened that they couldn't plan for, someone has their back.
Absolutely.
And talk about a sticky culture.
Yep.
And it's their company that they work for that has their back when the unexpected happens.
Yep.
And so how diligent would they be about the aluminium waste in the manufacturing process, and that it goes to the right place? It has so many little knock-on effects.
Yep.
This stewardship approach, it's interesting. It leads us into this idea. I know that you talk about servant leadership, and I'd love to, I really want to leave people with a model that they can use, and I'd love to work with you for a few minutes to build a visual model around servant leadership. And I always start a model with geometry. Geometry is a science in its own right, and geometry creates dimension and dynamic. Good geometry gives you how many components you're thinking about, and it gives you movement. And so if we think about the infinity loop, the figure 8 lying on its side, the infinity loop gives us two halves. On one side, we might have the leader on the right-hand side, and on the other side, we have, I don't love the word, but in the absence of something else better in my mind, the followers of that leader. It doesn't mean they're less than, but they are the people the leader is leading. And if you think about that infinity loop, if we can propel that loop, we could drive the collective result upward. We can elevate results. And of course, if we interrupt movement through that loop, everything settles to the bottom in nature. If you don't keep an energy behind something, ultimately it settles to the bottom. And so instead of elevating, it will diminish. So if we think about that and we start in the middle and we go around the leadership loop first, if we unpacked 3 key things to think about, let's call this the servant leadership model. And that's uncomfortable for some people. The idea of the servant leader, that's a whole other conversation. That's probably about ego, but let's park that. If we identified 3 key things on the leader side, Sam, that allowed that leader to then ultimately drive the left-hand side where the followers are through their service, what would be the top three things that you would place around that loop? What's the first thing that
I would I would say lead with kindness.
great.
I would say lead with kindness, because what you're doing is, it's an act of service, but it's an act of kindness to start off with, number one.
Yeah, we have so much in common, you and I. One of our core company's values, we have four, but one of our core company values is kindness.
Yep.
It's not a traditional business word, but it's an unbelievably powerful position. So, what does lead with kindness look like in your company? You've already given us some examples. You're turning waste
Yeah.
aluminium into a fund for people, but
But I think it needs to be more than words, meaning
sure,
it needs to be demonstratable,
yeah,
right? It has to be an essence of something, it has to be an action that people can see and understand. So, we talked a little bit about, servant leadership, and the fact that it was actually started by Jesus when he washed the people's feet, right? He didn't just think about it, he actually demonstrated. So first was an act of kindness, but then secondly, he actually demonstrated that out. It's a verb, right? So if you're kind in your heart and you haven't been able to demonstrate that kindness through meeting a need, right, it doesn't matter.
interesting. And so, start with kindness, and then we move on to okay, what's the second of the three things that we would give people advice on to be that servant leadership on the right hand side? So we move from kindness to what?
Demonstration. It's an act. You have to act it out, right? So being kind is something that you feel in your heart.
Yeah,
But after you feel it in your heart, you have to then act on it.
great. And so then that brings us to this third checkpoint on the leadership side. So you carry kindness in your heart. You actually demonstrate it. You do it on a day-to-day basis and in all the moments of opportunity. And then what does that lead to?
And then I would say the third thing is you have to teach a higher principle, which is, if you think about going back to Jesus, that's what he did, right? He wanted to make sure that every one of these people who were jockeying for position, recognized that in order to the greatest of you must serve. So that's the principle he was actually teaching. So he was moved with kindness, or he was moved with compassion, or he was moved with empathy, but then he responded to a need, which was to make sure that other than them washing their own feet, he washed their feet with a towel and, in a position of submission. And then he actually taught them, by doing that, he taught them a principle that was repeater. You could rinse and repeat that for generations to come.
And if we also then take that to a business application, right? The servant leader comes to the business world with kindness in their heart. And it's an interesting play on words, right? Are you driven primarily by commerciality or kindness? And they don't need to be mutually exclusive. They can coexist and should, if business is to be noble and a powerful force we've got on the planet. So come to the table with kindness in your heart, demonstrate it, actually do it on a day-to-day basis, and then teach people to a higher principle that each of us actually should lead. And then that moves us through the center of that infinite loop, that figure eight, over to the follower side, and that will impact people. What is the first shift that occurs in followers when they're being led by this servant leader on the right? What do we see kind of almost straight away, or what can we strive to achieve with people on that left-hand side when they have this leader?
I would say situational awareness, right? Because as soon as somebody does something like that for you, right, you are immediately aware. You start to become present, you start to become alive, because this was something that was out of the ordinary that was done for you, and it gets your attention and makes you present.
I'm actually going to put presence above that in a bracket. And so that when people become situationally aware and really present because of that servant leadership, what does that then turn into at the second step around their loop?
I think it goes from a head issue to a heart issue, right? What they observed in their head now actually touches their heart, which is where, the Bible says it's the wellspring of life, right?
Yeah,
And so it goes from a head issue to a heart issue where real change, real motivation, real passion, right? You're unleashing your passion because you just went from a head to a heart issue.
perfect. So this transition in between is head to heart, and you start to unleash that passion, that commitment, that motivation in people, which every business leader wants. And then that turns into at the third step.
Response.
Pardon?
I would say response, right? You have to respond to that heart issue now, right? Because your heart is full of that lesson that you learned, and you are now ready to go do something about it, right?
Mm.
I mean, so, if you are effective in that teaching, right now you have given the follower the ability to rinse and repeat, right? And
Yeah.
so if you think about it, in a successful culture, that is what is taking place, right? The leader is dying to self and teaching and with empathy and making sure that that they're getting the message across. But the follower is learning, especially if you're talking about a young person, right? We are actually cloning a lot of people in a good way, right? I'm talking about cloning in a good way. We're not taking their individualism out of it, but we are making sure that the people that are coming out from our organizations are people that are cut from the same cloth, if you will. Not a
Yeah.
bad thing.
And so, if we think about the choreography of servant leadership, we could take a view that servant leadership is an infinite cycle. It's constantly happening. And if we start at the middle and the leader shows up with kindness, genuine kindness in their heart, they are that person. They're not talking about it. That is who they are. They realize that they need to demonstrate that kindness in action on a day-to-day basis, in the big moments and the small moments, in the moments when some grace is required and in the moments when pace is required. They still come at it with this level of kindness. They demonstrate it. And, as they do that, they win the opportunity, if you like, to teach people to seek a higher purpose or seek a higher bar to jump over, if you like, and that everyone becomes the leader. And as we do that, that infinite loop continues on, crosses the center, and leans into the left-hand side where the follower is. And the first thing that occurs in people who are following a servant leadership is real self-awareness. They have this real presence, this real sense of, okay, so that's what this could be. And that's what leadership could be. And this is a way that I could be as well. And so then this transition from head to heart occurs, and they now take it at heart level, and motivation and passion and commitment emerge. And then motivation and passion and commitment emerge, a follower, they can't help but respond now. They have no choice. When they're driven by, this shared passion for what is happening, they must take action. And so it continues on through this infinite loop and drives everything upwards and elevates everything. And so long as you're driving that loop, everything will continue. Of course, if you interrupt that loop at any point on the leadership side, the follower side stops.
Yep.
And the movement of the loop starts to head downwards. The follower side is a function on the left as a function of the leadership on the right. It's a fantastic way to view and articulate servant leadership. Sam, thank you for helping me build the model. I hope people watching the podcast, and if you are listening to it, jump onto the YouTube channel and go and grab an image of the model. It is a very simple way of distilling, Sam's lessons around servant leadership into what actually happens if you come with kindness, demonstrate it in every moment, both pace and grace, teach people to go to a higher level, and then watch the left-hand side of the infinite loop, can continue to drive, if you like. So, if you could, let's think about legacy for a moment. If you could distill your entire approach to turning adversity into opportunity and building a great business, into a simple statement you would share with a young person that's on the way up? What would it be that you would share with them?
I would tell them to, focus on the little things because the big things will take care of themselves. That's what my father taught me, right? Focus on the little things and the big things will take care of themselves. So do the little things right,
Mm.
right? When you do the little things right, you can actually build on success. So that's very similar to the first 10 runs in singles, right? Because, getting your first 10 runs in singles isn't a very flashy way. It's not a very sexy way to get things done,
No.
right? In some ways, people would call you a plodder, but that's how you build a great inning, right? You
Yes.
start small, right? You get used to the light, you get used to the environment around you, right? You know who's on the non-strikers, and you know the field. You kind of you start to play yourself in,
Yes.
right? So just like in cricket, where you play yourself in life, you have to play yourself in. So you can't be in a hurry, my friend. You
Yeah.
got to take it small. And as you do that, and you're talking to somebody who loves speed. I'm somebody who works fast. I was a track runner when I was young. I still drive fast. So this is a little counterintuitive to the way God made me, but it is what I have found that leads to success.
And if you take the sporting analogy across most sports, actually, cricket, a great cricket innings and a century for the non-cricket followers, scoring 100 runs is a big deal. You would never see a world-class batsman refuse to take a single because it's one more run. You would never see a world-class baseball batter refuse to take first base and just stay and hit for the home run. You know, Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal or, Novak Djokovic have to win every point available to them. They can't just win the game. It's
Yeah.
point by point. It's the small things that accumulate and compound into the bigger things. As we come to a close, Sam, I'd love to um, I just do a thing at the end where I ask you some fast questions. People can find out a bit more about you and just like the immediate response that comes to mind. Are you happy to play that game with me a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. I'm going to have to define for you. You can't talk about a cricket skill, right? So if you could instantly master any skill, like you didn't have to practice it or anything, but you instantly mastered it, what would it be? Um, and how would you use it? If you could master any skill instantly, what would you want to master and how would you use it?
I would say ballroom dancing.
Right. And well, obviously you would dance, but I'm interested in why. Why ballroom dancing?
I think it's very graceful, and I think it could be useful. But it's something that's completely different to what I do. I've never tried it, but it looks such a graceful movement to it that it would be something that I would enjoy doing.
Yeah, fantastic. Um, we talked a little bit about Eli Goldratt's book, The Goal, which is really, in my opinion, a must read for anyone in business. But what is the last book you've read and loved, or a recent book that you've read and really taken a lot out of?
I would say a recent book that I have read that I really liked is called Switch, and it talks about how to make change where change is difficult,
Yeah,
right? And it talks about motivating the rider. It talks about instructing the rider, motivating the elephant, shaping the path.
yeah,
And if you think about leadership, we are in constant change. And it's very important not only for us to be able to handle that change, but to make sure that the people who are coming after us are able to manage that change. And so that's a book that I think
yeah.
would be an awesome read.
I think the book for the listeners is by Chip and Dan Heath. And if your interest has been piqued by the idea of the elephant and the rider, it's a great metaphor. I've read it, Sam, and I think it's one of the best pieces of work I've read on leading change, actually. If you could spend a day in the mind, this is a little bit more serious. If you could spend a day in the mind of any historical figure, um, who would it be and why? I think I might know, but I'm not sure. Who would it be and why? Any historical figure.
Well, it would have been awesome to spend time with Jesus, but I would like to have spent some time with Solomon, and asked him where he lost the plot.
That's interesting. Okay. That might be the most unique answer I've had to that question, actually, Sam. I want to thank you. You've been so generous with your time and actually with your wisdom. And I know there's so much in this that people that are leading business or organizations, not for profits, charities, whatever, could take out of this. Some of this is counterintuitive. Some of this is, flies in the face of this statement that we often hear that it's just business. And in Sam's world, it's not just business, it's people. And so, how do we grow the potential of people so that they reach the greatest potential they've been gifted through business? How do we make business a powerful force for good on the planet and, have stewardship and entrepreneurship live absolutely side by side? I really appreciate the time and the generosity and the depth of conversation, Sam. I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you for having me, Simon. It was my pleasure and an honor.
Thank you very much.